In Paul's day, there were approximately 6 million slaves in the Roman Empire. Slavery was an accepted institution and a way of life for many people. But make no mistake about it, slavery in any form, in any culture, remains wrong. The claim that one can own another person remains fundamentally wrong. All men and women were created in the image of God. And by the way, while I'm at it, racism, prejudice, injustice, and discrimination of any kind, all of it is wrong. So what do I do with the following scriptures on slaves and masters? Ephesians 6:5 says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one of you for whatever good they do, whether they are a slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him." A theologian said, "Nowhere in the New Testament is slavery per se attacked or condemned, though the overall thrust of the gospel is against it." Paul's ministry was not to overthrow the Roman government or any of its institutions, but to preach the gospel and to win the lost to Christ. And I believe strongly that the preaching of the gospel eventually led to the removal of slavery. I believe the preaching of the gospel led to the elevation of women, the proper care for the elderly, and providing rights for children. I believe the preaching of the gospel was instrumental in creating equal rights for all people. And I believe the preaching of the gospel brings freedom of every kind. So again, what do I do when Paul is addressing Christian slaves, and Christian masters? I believe we can take Paul's words out of a master-slave context and, get this, apply them to an employer-employee context in the workplace. I think we can do that. First, let's talk about advice to Christian employees. It says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart, serving wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people. Because you know that the Lord will reward each of us for the good they do, whether they're slave or free." Okay, so I've read that twice. What do I get from that? Well, the Christian worker must follow the directives of their employer. They must work on the job as if they were actually serving Christ. The Christian employee must show their boss respect. They must put in an honest day's work because they're not just working for the company, they're working for Christ. The Christian worker never takes advantage of their boss. They must work with singleness of heart, keeping focused on doing a good job. They don't work hard just when the boss is looking. They work hard because Christ is looking. There is never one behavior at church and another behavior at work. When the Christian employee gets a job they do not like, they believe they're doing the will of God. They continue to exhibit a positive attitude on the job. Lastly, the Christian worker does not work to be rewarded primarily by a paycheck. The Christian employee works to be rewarded by the Lord. The Christian worker never gives lame excuses for being late at work. Now, by the way, some of the most unbelievable lame excuses bosses have heard go like this: "I was here, but I fell asleep in the parking lot." Or like, "My fake eyelashes were stuck together." Or like, "An astrologer warned me of a car accident on a major highway, so I took all the back roads." Or another one, "I had morning sickness." That, by the way, was from a male employee. Hey, the Christian worker does not give lame excuses. They just give a good day's work. Okay, secondly, let's talk about advice to Christian employers or bosses. Let's go back to the word. Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no favoritism with him. The Christian boss sees every decision concerning those who work under them made in the light of serving the Lord. They must go beyond company policies, serving those who serve the company. And never does the Christian boss exploit the worker. How sad some Christian workers say, my boss goes to so-and-so church, claims to be a Christian, but you never know it by their bad language, bad attitude, and bad treatment of those who work for them. Should never happen, folks. The Christian boss should never seek to threaten or punish those who work under them unless it becomes absolutely necessary. Christian bosses motivate through encouragement and rewards. The Christian boss never shows favoritism, partiality, or preference to one person over another. Be the kind of boss whose integrity impresses those who work for you. One man said this. He said, years ago I was involved in a business meeting in which one of our clients tried to persuade my boss to cut some corners that were, at the very least, unethical. My boss confronted the man and said something along the lines of, are you suggesting what it sounds like you're suggesting? The man hemmed and hawed and finally said, yes. My boss stood up and said, this meeting is over and so is our relationship. Then he stormed out of the office, and it was his office. The client sat there dumbfounded, and frankly, the guy said, so did I. He said, my boss came back 15 seconds later and said, did you hear me? The meeting is over. This guy will show you out the door. And then he sat down at his desk and started going through his mail. The man concluded about the guy he worked for. He said, I knew my boss desperately needed the business this client offered, but he didn't want the client's money bad enough to cheat others. Hey, let's do what God says. Let's practice good employer-employee relationships. Let's do things God's way.